Picture ancient Rome, 67 AD. The emperor, Nero, walks through the Grand Forum, hand in hand with a woman adorned in silks and jewels. She moves gracefully, her face calm, but everyone watching feels a chill. Whispers ripple through the marble columns. Because the woman is not who she seems. She is not a woman at all. She is Sporus, a boy, and what Nero did to him defies the limits of power, sanity, and cruelty. Sporus's face was hauntingly familiar to the Romans, especially to Nero. He looked like someone the emperor had loved, Poppaea Sabina, Nero's wife. Poppaea had died in the palace, her unborn child lost with her. Rumors spread that Nero himself caused her death, kicking her in a rage. Grief didn't humble Nero. It twisted him. And when he saw Sporus, he didn't see a slave. He saw a resurrection. Poppaea was said to be stunning, graceful, manipulative, cunning. A former wife of Otho, she rose through the ranks with charm and calculation. Nero had once worshipped her. When she died, part of him unraveled. Instead of mourning, Nero conjured a solution. What if he could reverse death itself? What if he could make her live again, through someone else's body? The boy Sporus was slight, delicate-featured, with a gentle demeanor. He was perhaps 13 or 14, just on the edge of becoming a man. Nero had him seized and brought to the imperial court. Then came the decision, terrifying and irreversible. The emperor ordered Sporus to be castrated, not because he had wronged the state, but because Nero wanted a wife. The operation wasn't done in secret. It was announced, approved, executed by imperial physicians. The trauma, the pain, was unimaginable. Yet in Rome, this act wasn't punished. It was transformed into theater. Sporus was given gowns, cosmetics, servants. He was renamed, paraded, and finally, he was wed to the emperor in a mock imperial wedding. Nero stood before a crowd in a golden robe, declaring Sporus his empress. The ceremony was complete with a dowry, veil, and vows. The Roman elite watched, their expressions frozen. Could they protest? Speak out. In Nero's Rome, silence was survival. To laugh might mean death. So they clapped, they bowed, and behind their eyes, fear festered. It's easy to label Nero mad, but what makes this tale chilling is how calculated it was. Nero wasn't stumbling through grief. He was performing control, reality-bending control. He believed he could reshape the world to fit his fantasies. In Sporus, he found a puppet, a canvas, a living shrine to his guilt and desire. Sporus was made to behave like Poppaea in every way. Her mannerisms were taught to him, her jewelry placed on his body, her old dresses tailored to fit his frame. He was forced to mimic her laugh, her walk, her voice. The emperor didn't want a new love. He wanted a copy, an echo of the dead, played by a mutilated child. But Rome was falling apart. The treasury was bleeding. Military commanders in Gaul, Hispania, and Africa grew restless. Plots brewed in the provinces. Senators whispered rebellion. Nero, meanwhile, staged plays, sang songs, and doted on Sporus. While Rome begged for leadership, it got theater and horror. And yet, there were those who cheered Nero on. His inner circle, men like Tigellinus, fueled the performance. They feared Nero, yes, but they also benefited from his madness. They gifted Sporus silks and perfumes, trying to curry favor. But no one asked how Sporus felt. No one dared. What went through Sporus's mind during these years? Did he hope for freedom? Did he ever weep alone in the silence of the palace halls? Or was he numb, conditioned to obey, to survive? His voice is lost to history. No diary, no quote, just silence. And in that silence lies the deepest cruelty of all. Nero didn't stop with just the wedding. He brought Sporus on public tours, into the Senate, to theaters, even temples. At one gladiator event, Sporus was paraded in front of tens of thousands as the empress reborn. Some laughed, others turned away, but most applauded, because they had to. The boundaries of Rome's morality were stretched, then torn. The people had seen brutality before. Emperors had killed, tortured, and stolen. But this was different. It was spiritual desecration. Nero had not only taken a life, he had resurrected it in the form of a humiliated child and called it love. Incredibly, there were those who said Sporus and Nero looked happy together. But what does happy mean when the cost is your body, your freedom, your identity? Sporus became a symbol, not of Poppaea, not of love, but of what Rome allowed. His forced femininity wasn't liberation. It was erasure. Nero's grip on power weakened. Rebellions turned into declarations. The Senate declared him an enemy of the state. His own guards deserted him. As Nero fled, Sporus followed, still dressed as a bride. When Nero was cornered and took his own life, Sporus was there, holding the man who had destroyed him. But the story didn't end there. After Nero's death, Sporus was passed around like a cursed heirloom. Nymphidius Sabinus, a power-hungry Praetorian Guard prefect, took Sporus for himself and declared that he too would marry him. Sporus, once again, became a fantasy for another tyrant. This time, Sporus was cast as the groom. Sabinus wanted to show that he had tamed Nero's ghost. Once more, Sporus donned ceremonial attire. The wedding never came. Sabinus was killed before it could take place. But for Sporus, it must have felt like an endless cycle of roles, never his own. Next came Emperor Vitellius. He had a different plan. Vitellius wanted Sporus to play a part in a public theatrical execution, a cruel parody of myth where the boy would be raped by a wild animal on stage. This wasn't theater. It was torture disguised as spectacle, and Sporus knew it. Rather than submit to yet another violation, Sporus made a final, desperate choice. He took his own life before the performance could occur. He was still likely a teenager. His death, like his life, was not his own, but it was the only thing he could still control. Rome moved on. New emperors came. Historians wrote about Nero's madness, Poppaea's beauty, and Rome's greatness. But Sporus? He was a footnote, a ghost, a name whispered with discomfort. He left no legacy, only a trail of suffering carved into the records of others. What does Sporus represent today? Perhaps more than we dare admit. He is the embodiment of history's forgotten victims, those whose pain was never recorded because their humanity was never acknowledged. Rome called it love, but it was conquest. Sporus's body was used, his identity stolen, his story overwritten. And yet, his existence continues to haunt the study of Roman history. Every time we speak his name, we break the silence he was forced to endure. And maybe, just maybe, that matters. Nero's story ends with chaos, suicide, and mockery. But Sporus' story is something else entirely. It is a quiet scream. A life turned into theater, a boy turned into a symbol. A tragedy that exposes the darkest corners of civilization, where power isn't checked and the powerless are reshaped into masks. There are no monuments for Sporus, no statue in the Forum, no inscription on the Palatine Hill. And yet, his story survives. In books, in whispers, in warnings. Because what happened to him could only happen in a world that worships control more than compassion. So what do we do with a story like this? We remember. We speak his name. We examine the systems, ancient and modern, that allow lives to be rewritten, erased, and commodified. We don't look away, because history, at its worst, demands that we stare it down. This is not just a Roman story. It is a human story. It is about grief turned to obsession, love turned to violence, and survival without dignity. It's a story we must continue to tell, not for Nero's memory, but for the shadow who walked beside him, draped in silks, with no voice of his own. And now that you've heard the whole tale, what do you think? Was Nero truly insane, or was he something more dangerous? A man who believed he could reshape reality? Was Sporus a victim, a symbol, or something even deeper, a mirror held up to an empire's soul? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more history they don't dare teach in school. Because behind the myths, beneath the marble, history hides its darkest truths. This is Histoeureka, where every echo from the past demands to be heard. Rome, by then, was not unfamiliar with cruelty. Gladiator fights, public crucifixions, and political purges were common. But what Nero did to Sporus was different. It wasn't just punishment, it was a transformation. An emperor had decided to remake a human being into a fantasy, not an art, in flesh. It was theater with blood, obsession as ceremony. The Roman people were entertained by horror. They had seen prisoners eaten alive for sport. They watched dwarves fight animals in the Colosseum. But even they, hardened by spectacle, felt unease about Sporus. A child transformed into an empress? Not for glory, not for survival, but because grief had curdled into delusion. No amount of applause could drown out the discomfort. Behind closed doors, Sporus likely lived in fear. Nero was known for his unpredictable rages. He once stabbed a servant to death over a miscommunication. He burned Christians alive as torches in his gardens. For Sporus, who had already lost his body, his home, and his name, the loss of safety was a final cut, one he could never escape. Imagine Sporus sitting alone at night in a marble room too large for comfort, the smell of perfume still clinging to his sleeves, knowing that everything about him, the way he dressed, spoke, even walked, was no longer his choice. How does one mourn their own identity while being forced to impersonate someone else's ghost? The court watched. The senators watched. The slaves watched. All were caught in Nero's gravity, orbiting his madness. No one moved. No one dared. And in that frozen world of fear and favor, Sporus became a living symbol. Not of power, but of its distortion. He was both imperial bride and imperial prisoner. In a way, Sporus became a kind of performance art. Nero was obsessed with drama and spectacle. He fancied himself a singer, a poet, an actor. He even insisted on performing on stage in Greek theaters during his visits abroad. And Sporus? He was Nero's greatest production. A silent, unwilling actor in a play written in blood. But history isn't just made in palaces. Far from the domes and fountains, Rome's poor were starving. Fires broke out. Plagues spread. The legions, tired of imperial nonsense, began to mutter rebellion. Even the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite protectors, grew restless. Yet Nero remained distracted, weaving fantasies around a castrated child. What would Sporus have been had he been allowed to grow? A poet? A rebel? A forgotten slave with a peaceful life? We'll never know, because Nero decided that his grief was more important than another person's destiny. He didn't just kill a boy's future. He replaced it with a corpse's shadow. One account describes how Nero forced Sporus to reenact Poppaea's death in a theatrical display. He was made to cry out in pain, clutch his stomach, and fall to the floor over and over again. For Nero, this was art. For Sporus, it was trauma relived for entertainment. This was not love. It was torment in the costume of romance. Even after Nero's death, Sporus was not freed. He was too valuable, too notorious, to simply be released. His image, warped as it was, carried power. Sabinus wanted that image. Vitellius wanted to destroy it. And the people? The people didn't ask what Sporus wanted. They asked how much he still looked like the dead woman who haunted the empire. In a twisted sense, Sporus became a trophy. To possess him was to possess a part of Nero's myth. But the myth was never Sporus's to carry. Every attempt to shape him into someone else carved another scar into his identity. Until, finally, there was almost nothing left of the boy who had once been Sporus. Roman culture was deeply patriarchal, and castration was seen as deeply shameful. Yet Nero glorified it, publicly. He didn't just erase Sporus's manhood. He rewrote the rules of masculinity. He declared that love didn't need consent. That grief gave him license to mutilate. That if reality disappointed him, he had the right to craft a new one, no matter the cost. And all of it, the pain, the spectacle, the absurdity, was recorded in books by the empire's historians. Tacitus, Suetonius, Dio, but none of them recorded Sporus's voice. They recorded what Nero did, what Rome said, but not how Sporus lived it. That silence echoes through time louder than any scream. We like to think that empires fall because of battles or bad economics. But sometimes, empires fall because they rot from within, because they lose sight of human value. Sporus wasn't a general or a senator, but his story tells us more about Rome's sickness than 100 wars ever could. In modern eyes, Sporus might be seen through many lenses. Some see him as a queer icon, others as a tragic abuse victim. Some see him as both. But what cannot be argued is this: he never chose this life. It was forced upon him by the whims of a man who saw himself as a god. Imagine the terror of knowing your name would only survive in the context of someone else's madness. That your very body became a monument to another's delusion. That your legacy would be debated by scholars who never considered your pain, only your proximity to power. When Sporus ended his life, he did it not out of weakness, but clarity. He knew what awaited him under Vitellius. Another public mockery, another display, another rape disguised as theater. It was not a choice between life and death. It was a choice between obliteration and a final act of defiance. And now, centuries later, we speak his name. That matters. For all those who were never given the chance to tell their story, Sporus becomes more than a tragic figure. He becomes a symbol of the silenced. Not because he asked to be, but because history finally began to listen. The story of Sporus is not just about Nero. It's about us. About how we tell stories. Who we remember, who we ignore, and who we reframe for our own narratives. Sporus' truth is still out of reach, but the least we can do is look at it, unflinchingly, honestly. Sporus walked through fire and marble, torn silk and shouted lies. He walked through the heart of an empire's sickness. And somehow, for a brief moment in history, his pain cracked through the propaganda. And that is worth remembering.